starting.
Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the RaMen. I think we're at number 66 now. And of course, I like to talk to people who are doing something. We're actually taking action to make positive change. And one of the problems that I had as president of Atheist Alliance of America was that I frequently got emails from people saying, "Hey, I'm no longer a believer. But I'm in an Islamic country, and how do I get out? How do I get help?" And I don't know what organizations to turn these people to. In all their various situations that they report, I feel powerless. So very often I've tried to refer them to y'all. All right, this is Sarah Haider and Mohammed Syed of Ex-Muslims of North America. How you guys doing?
Great.
Yeah.
Great.
How did you get started in what you're doing, and what do you do?
Largely in the attempt to find other people like us. There are very few ex-Muslims that are public, and when we met, we actually talked about the fact that we know so few, so there may be other people that are doing the same thing in their own circles, avoiding the public light. So we started out trying to find other people, and when we actually found people, we found out a lot of them were in trouble, and a lot of them were in crisis and in need. And from there, we decided that we needed to do something more, and we started our organization to help people all over America and Canada.
Okay, so when you get to help these people, and what sort of situations can somebody be in where they should turn to you, and what have you guys been able to do to help?
Well, the vast majority of issues are, I think, dealing with social ostracization. And then on top of that, then you get some people who are dealing with physical abuse, with mental abuse and psychological abuse from family members because they don't believe anymore. Various threats of taking them back home and getting them married or whatever it is. So what we do is we provide them a support network, and in order to do this, we have events all over the United States and Canada. We have about how many active groups at the moment? 18 active groups throughout the United States and Canada, and these are people that we've brought in into the organization. And in order to do this, we have this screening process, which I think is pretty unique. And it is actually quite sad that we even have to have it, but we do, in order to make sure that our events are private and people have a sense of safety that they just wouldn't get if it was just an open air meeting, because a lot of people are in the closet, so to speak. They haven't told anybody, and the only people that have any idea that they don't believe are fellow members in Ex-Muslims of North America. So we hold these meetings, these events, once a month at least, and primarily they're social events, and they're just a way for people to just be themselves, have some opportunity to be themselves, to make friends, and to have some kind of a community there for them in case something happens. And we find that for many members, something does happen here and there, and then they'll lean on the community for support, whether it is just someone that's out there who you can talk to, or if it's someone who can offer you a bed or a couch to sleep on.
Do you find that the problems that people come to you for, are they mostly family-oriented situations, or are they political situations?
Over here in America and Canada, they're usually family-oriented. There are some political situations as well, but primarily we don't have state persecution over here, so we don't have to deal with that side of the issue. On the other hand, a lot of people are so socialized that they can't look outside of the community, and they have. For women, for example, you have to marry somebody that is from the community, and you can't get out of that. And so a lot of people feel very trapped. And just seeing other people out there that are like you, that have gone through those obstacles and are independent now, makes a huge, huge difference. We often have people that when they join, it's one of those common lines we hear, I thought I was the only one. And knowing that there are hundreds or thousands of people like you that have gone through the same struggles you have gives you a lot of courage. So a lot of people that wouldn't actually stand up and start speaking out are speaking out. Now you've probably noticed that more and more ex-Muslims are speaking out everywhere. And that sort of network effect of people finding enough courage by seeing other people like them. And that's the change we need. We need more people out there speaking about it to empower ex-Muslims everywhere. There isn't that much hard data available, but I would say in Saudi Arabia, there was a poll that 5% of Saudi Arabians are atheist. I'd be willing to bet in America that's much, much higher for Muslim communities. And say if 10% of people in Muslim communities were speaking out about the problems, that would make a massive difference. So we're sort of trying to achieve that by empowering individuals.
Very good. What do you add to that?
I think a lot of people underestimate how important a community is and how constrictive your life can be if you're in an environment where your family and your friends don't love you in an unconditional way, where there is a condition on it, and that condition is you have to belong to this religion, and if you don't belong to a religion, you have to fear the people that are closest to you. You know, you have to fear your parents, your brothers, your sisters, and a lot of times you hear internationally, you hear of honor killings and people that, you know, die because they're atheists or humanists. And oftentimes the family is involved, or it'll be the local village that probably knew the person as a human being and were able to dehumanize them so quickly. So we're in this unique situation where the people that we have to fear the most are those that we love the most, and those that we don't want to lose. So it's this very strange situation, and we think that the way out is that you have someone there, you have some social network there. So if you need to just leave it all behind, you're not completely alone, and you have someone that can support you, that can at least make you feel like you aren't completely insane.
This being a systemic problem, I mean, do you ever communicate with the source of the problem? I mean, is there any communication with the still Muslim community in trying to address the situation at all?
Very little. So if you talk to more liberal Muslims, they will say that it's not a problem at all. Instead of
widespread denial about the issue. And if you talk to conservative Muslims, like you were saying, if you talk to liberal Muslims, there's widespread denial that ex-Muslims or even progressive Muslims, like Muslims who will say that certain parts of the Quran need to be abandoned because they don't work well with modern values. Even those Muslims will experience a lot of pressure from the community, and liberal Muslims usually don't acknowledge it. The community as a whole doesn't really acknowledge that there are those kinds of problems, and the conservative members of the community actually support it. The conservative members of the community will tell you that yes, this atheism is a problem that needs to be solved, and it needs to be approached as if it's some sort of a social contagion, and we need to take care of it, take care of the situation.
When we speak about the problems that Muslims encounter, we're told that we're trying to make the atmosphere toxic for Muslims, and we're doing a disservice, and we're increasing persecution of Muslims. So speaking out our own problems is persecution of Muslims, and they don't bring up the fact that somewhere between 20 and over a dozen countries, apostasy is illegal. You go to jail or are murdered, and 2 to 3 times of that, blasphemy is illegal. That is not a concern. The concern is the perception of Muslims. So if human rights are your issue, let's work on human rights for everybody. If you want to talk about Islamophobia, if you want to talk about anti-Muslim bigotry, let's also talk about the bigotry towards people that don't want to be Muslim anymore. But that is never brought up.
It was exactly the reason that I asked you the question about, in dealing with the systemic problem, dealing with the Muslim communities themselves, about loosening the bans or the hostility, because I'm expecting that you should be able to reason with these people. And for the answer that I'm getting, I mean, it's like the reverse of what I was intending. I mean, you should be able to reason with, regardless of religion, right? That at least within the United States, right, within North America, that there's a problem of perception, and that they need to be a bit lax, I mean, so they're not perceived as being quite so dogmatic and unreasonable. And it seems that the problem is even worse.
It is worse than I thought when we started this. 5 years ago, I thought the problem was much better than it actually is.
No, but both of us come from relatively liberal families, so we're lucky in that what we experienced when we left the religion wasn't as extreme as what other people experienced. So we kind of went in with the perception that everyone's going to be like us. And what we found out is not only was our experience not at all the average experience, it was we're rare in the sense that we were able to get away with speaking our minds, and our families are still in touch with us. And I'll explain my situation a little bit, I think, because it touches on what is a bigger issue, which is that the community as a whole sort of polices religious practice. And to the extent that you have one person that's stepping out and that's speaking about problems within the community takes action to prevent this person from talking or to ostracize them. I've been speaking out and I've been talking, and my parents, they haven't pushed me away. They kind of support the idea that I speak my mind. Of course, they don't agree with what I'm saying, but they haven't pushed me away. And for this, they have received backlash from their community, their extended family members.
Your family are Muslim.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and they're being what I was asking other religious leaders to be, tolerant and
Right,
accepting.
and they're experiencing the ostracization that I would have experienced. They're experiencing the isolation and the shame from the community that I would have experienced because they're unwilling to cut ties with me. So there are ways of policing behavior, and it's effective because you don't want to be alone, and especially in the case of Muslim communities, many of whom are immigrants. You're here and you have nothing but that one little community. You may not be able to relate to, my parents, for example, cannot relate to American culture in the same way that I can because they weren't raised here. So connection with the Pakistani community is incredibly important for them because that's what they have to experience, social life. That's what they have. So when it's cut off, it's incredibly painful for them. And I think this is a broader issue with Muslim communities in general.
I don't make a huge distinction between religious groups, and often I'm criticized by that because people that come from Christian backgrounds or people who are still Christian will criticize me for not being harsh enough against Muslims, right? And I don't ever tailor. I mean, obviously, I'm in a predominantly Christian society. All of our politicians are Christian dominionists. I'm going to be complaining about Christianity more than any other religion. I will, on any occasion, criticize anybody of any other religion once that becomes an issue to talk about. Do I need to pay more attention to criticizing Muslims than I am Christians in this situation?
More attention overall needs to be paid to the issue because more people are suffering and suffering in a far worse way. So it's like if you just look at America, people that are in Mormonism versus mainstream Christianity versus the fundamentalist Latter-day Saints, there are distinctions between how bad situations are. So we should try to focus more on the worst situation so to alleviate the maximum harm that's going on. The same sort of thing applies to Muslim communities and countries. And in particular countries, the laws over there are medieval. And it's not, like often we just talk about Saudi Arabia, it's not just Saudi Arabia, it's across the board. In Malaysia, which is often regarded as one of the liberal countries, women have half the inheritance rights than men. In some provinces in Indonesia, Sharia is implemented, caning happens, and it's a very broad systemic issue. And if it was, say, happening in parts of the West, there's no way it would be tolerated. But because it's in another part of the world, we don't speak up about it.
I was able to go to the United Arab Emirates a year ago at the invitation of people that wanted just to be able to talk to somebody, because as an Arab in a Sharia state, you are required by law to believe, which I don't understand how you enforce a requirement to believe. That's a thought crime. I mean, how can you even consider enforcing a thought crime? And so I'm there as a guest of somebody who says he's tired of listening to the prayers from the minarets, and he just wants to be able to have a reasonable conversation with somebody without being incriminated for it or being judged for having these thoughts. But while I was there, I get to see how you've got this this nuance between Saudi Arabia and the UAE and then Iraq. I was at a Scandinavian death metal concert in Dubai, which I thought was surreal, and I'm talking to Arabic women, right, dressed similar to the way you are right now. They're not having to be covered up. They're kind of like hiding out, blending in with all of the foreign visitors. So this is their only time to be free. And some of these women were telling me that the only advantage to being in the UAE is that they're not in Saudi, because there's no place in Saudi where they can sneak out and just be regular people. And then this is why they have such a high suicide rate for the women over there. And then I'm listening to, as I said, a Scandinavian death metal show at the same time where just across the water in Iraq, they were executing a heavy metal band for playing metal. I'm like, why this huge disparity in the rules? And this shortly after they had the Norwegian woman that was raped because there was no witnesses. It's a crime that she committed, and so the leader then has to do like this public apology on the excuse that we're a very young country. I understand you're trying to be progressive, and you're allowed to use this special executive power in this one instance that's got a whole lot of public opinion going against you. But I mean, there's got to be some point of progress for the entire collective.
So the biggest issue is there's no freedom of speech, there's no freedom of dissent. So unless you're able to talk about these problems, progress can't happen. And freedom of speech is very dangerous because then you start questioning religion. And there are clerics on record, on video that have talked about this, that we can't allow freedom of speech because it will allow freedom of thought, it will allow freedom of religion, it would destroy our societies. That is how they view it. So if freedom of speech didn't exist in America, how much poorer would we be as a society? How hard would it be for us to advance in any direction, any social change, anything? So eliminate freedom of speech and you'll see the exact same issues happening that are happening across the Muslim world. Yeah. So I think that's one of the biggest things we need to target. We need to open up the societies where people can speak and not face consequences.
I think that's something that's totally just taken for granted in Western societies. Like when I talk about freedom of speech, I think it's only just college campuses. And
that's what I was just about to bring up.
Right, there's the issues of having certain speakers, and I think we're in a position of privilege. Western countries are privileged in that they have never had to fight for these freedoms. They don't know what it's like to live in a world where your freedom of speech, where you can't take it for granted, that of course you're going to be able to talk about certain things, and of course you're going to be able to speak your mind and live your life the way you want to live. I think that is, I mean, I don't like using these words, but it's a form of privilege. And I think we'll have to re-educate some, especially young people, and teach them about the importance of these values, because I think that they take them for granted and they don't understand what it would be like if that was taken away. And we have an example, and we can point to different countries around the world and we can say, this is what a country looks like when there's no freedom of speech.
People in this country, you're right, people in this country think that freedom of speech issues are so they should be able to come onto anybody's Facebook and blow them up about whatever they want to complain about and be offensive at somebody else's expense. This they think is freedom of speech. Right? I had to be rushed out of a restaurant for explaining to somebody why I thought the Quran was wrong. Oh, this is a 4-year prison sentence for saying that the Quran is wrong. Right? That's a freedom of speech issue.
Where was this? Where you had to?
This was in Dubai, and so we have to go now, so that in 1 minute I had to be in the car and down the road.
Wow.
So this is just a perspective. It never would have occurred to me that you can't say these words, you can't insult someone's religion, and that saying the religion that you think their religion is wrong is considered an insult and a 4-year prison sentence. That's well outside of my experience.
Now imagine that you grew up in that society. What chance would there be for that thought to ever occur to you that the Quran is wrong? So if you close down society to such an extent that you know that even thinking of these thoughts will land you in jail, progress will never happen. And that's what the idea that you could be an atheist was so foreign to me growing up that it felt like atheists were insane. There's no way anybody could come to that conclusion. And we need more people speaking up about the problems of Islam so they can see the atheism, normalize atheism, normalize not just atheism, dissent of all forms. So societies are forced to progress.
So this imam that tells you that if you allow freedom of speech, then you'll allow freedom of thought, and then people will start analyzing things that will destroy our society. How correct is he? How accurate is that statement, and what does it really mean?
In the sense that it destroy his society? Yeah. He's probably correct, I think, in the sense that it will destroy it from what he sees as a pure culture. He wants if an imam wants a religious society, an Islamic society, then it's true. He's correct that opening up these kinds of freedoms will take it away. And it's interesting because Islam has this view that Christianity didn't have when Christianity was modernizing, humanizing. You had Christian humanists who are advocating for more liberal values or progressive values, and they didn't know that they were walking away from God. They didn't know that once you open these things up, you liberalize society to the extent that it disempowers religion. And I don't think they had an idea of where they were headed. They were headed to these secular societies, these societies where atheism is more commonplace, or at least tolerated to the extent that we do have here. But Muslims have the advantage of being a few centuries back, where they can look forward and they know what happened to Christian societies when you opened up these freedoms, and what happened when you tolerated dissent. What happens is that women walk around in miniskirts and in bikinis, and there's people sleep around, and these things that mainstream Muslims consider to be despicable and the gateway to hell.
But it obviously isn't the criminality that they make it out to be. I mean, when in a Muslim country, you will hear somebody say that if you can see this woman's hair for example, is one of the arguments that I hear. If you can see your hair, then you're going to be driven to a passionate rage that you cannot control, right? I grew up in Los Angeles. You know, I had a very different experience. I know the rule is that a woman can lie down next to me naked, and it's still, unless there's some kind of invitation, then I still don't go there. You know, and I'm fully expected to control my own urges, and I'm responsible for them. I think I've heard so many stories about people, you know, like raping their own 12-year-old niece on the way to the restroom or whatever because she's there and available and you can't control yourself. What a pathetic excuse. And I've heard it from a lot of different religious perspectives.
It's insulting. It's insulting to men.
Yes.
I don't know. Like, honestly,
It's one of those things, though. But if you argue against that logic, you're arguing against God's logic. You know, because that's something that's implied by the Quran and the Hadith and other religious scriptures too. I think the Bible underscores that kind of thinking. And if you're arguing against it, you're blaspheming to some extent. So you're not allowed to argue against it, and you're not allowed to talk about women in a different way. And I think when it comes to feminism as a whole, feminism is, I think, despised across the Muslim world, or at least that's been my experience, that it's just despised as a way to lead women to sin. And female sexuality is something to be just honed down, to controlled, because if women are allowed to be as sexual as they want to be, then we're going to lead to societal decay. That's what they think. And you know, you would think that they were able to look across to the United States or to various Western countries and say that, okay, society didn't actually collapse. But that logic doesn't really...
From their perspective, it has collapsed. Depends on how you define what society should be.
Yeah, from the sense of morality, it has collapsed. And they do think of Western civilization as a soulless kind of a place.
Well, there's another huge difference that I have with religious believers. I mean, morality for me is not that women keep themselves covered so that they're not attractive. Morality for me is that we don't throw homosexuals off buildings. You know,
but if God is commanding you and God is the source of morality, what is wrong with doing that?
Right. And so I think it all...
Well, this is another reason that I argue for objective morality and not God's subjective opinion. When it's not even God's subjective opinion, it's the guys who are pretending to speak for God who write the opinion and then say that it was actually God that told them to say that.
I think that's where atheists come in, which is to say that you're never going to be able to argue for an objective morality unless you can also say that there's a need for it, that religion actually doesn't give us the whole picture. And here is this argument, this proof, this evidence that can show you how religion doesn't really have all the answers, where maybe it contradicts, where maybe there's problems within the text, problems within the historical narrative that they give us. And if we can put in a little bit of doubt, where they feel like, okay, maybe religion doesn't give us an entire complete version of what reality is like and what truth is, and they won't trust it to base their morality on either. So it needs to back off its claims of truth in order for an objective morality to step in.
We currently make these connections about how bad Muslims are, and the Christians will obviously argue that they're not as bad as the Muslims are. Well, as you said, that the Muslims are just a bit behind in the times, because if we move back 700 years, look where Christianity was 700 years ago. Every bit as bad, doing just as much. And as you mentioned, they didn't know the course that they were taking when they started being secular, when they started promoting science and humanism, that they were actually disempowering religion. And this is where obviously we need to go with Islam. Islam needs to figure out that they're going to create this polarizing situation where they're going to demonize themselves in the public eye, or they're going to start becoming more liberal and more tolerant. If they want to hold to the belief at all, it has to be an attractive belief, not a completely prejudiced, hateful belief, which is the way it's being perceived now. Am I correct?
Well, to the extent that I think there are a small minority of Muslims, educated Muslims, well-off Muslims in the West who care about perception in the sense that they want Islam to seem more liberal than it is, and they're willing to cover up illiberal aspects of Islam. But I think the vast majority of the Muslim world doesn't care what the West has to say or the West thinks about how they're living, because they have such a strong sense of certainty that they are correct.
The other issue is we need to talk about these issues honestly. So about instilling doubt. If we're papering over what the problems within Islam are, then there's no way that doubt can be instilled. Just like Christianity, Islam has historically done horrible things. The scripture contains horrible things. One of the go-to arguments that I think I've seen Matt Dillon and others use is about slavery. How can you talk about morality when your God condones slavery? The same thing is this within Islam. But we never talk about the
all
Islamic
of that
slave
depends on
trade.
what your morality is, though. If you come from it from a perspective that I already have the revelation of what the world actually looks like, who am I to create morality? Who am I to know whether or not slavery is just or unjust? God tells me, and God tells me the truth about the universe, so of course I'm going to follow it. So we have to have this sense of, we can't trust this. We have to, that's why we have to rely on something else.
Yeah, but a great percentage of people do believe slavery is wrong. Even Muslims believe slavery is wrong. They don't know that it's a part and parcel of their religion, that their prophet practiced slavery, he had sex slaves. And if that is brought up, it provokes their dissonance and they have to try to square it away. On the other hand, if we never ever talk about it, that change will never happen. We talk about the Atlantic slave trade, and we should. We never talk about the Arab slave trade, which is larger, more extensive, more brutal, had more victims. It's never brought up.
And isn't it still ongoing?
Not
because when I was
like
in Dubai, they were telling me that there's actually slaves in Dubai that they were building it.
So on a legal basis, it's illegal. But what they do is they have workers come in, they confiscate their passports, and they force them to. Yeah. So it's closer to indentured servitude, but it's the same sort of concept. But even with slavery in Saudi Arabia until the 1960s, slavery was actually legal. The mosque, the Kaaba, had slaves that worked over there maintaining it. And this is something, Raza Aslam, for example, has multiple times said Muhammad banned slavery. And there was no comment, there was no nothing until we started talking about it. The fact that you have millions of people in America that should know better and are accepting that at face value is alarming.
Especially when you can just Google it. You don't have to take his word for it. You can just Google something and then see for yourself. And we were both shocked that everybody was just taking what Raza Hassan has to say about a variety of things in religion. Slavery being the most
despicable.
It's amazing to me that you can even have the guts to just spout a bald-faced lie and know that nobody will really correct you. Nobody will say anything. They will just take you as a scholar who can lead them to the right path of understanding Islam. So I think that ex-Muslims have a role to play there, where we can correct the score a little bit and we can talk about things and people can look it up. They don't have to take our word for it. At least we put a little bit of doubt in their story so they can Google it for yourself. So Muhammad had, as Muhammad mentioned, the Prophet Muhammad, actually, he had sex slaves and he had slaves of his own. And the only thing that the Quran did ban was that you cannot enslave a Muslim. And that is not to say a Muslim cannot enslave a Muslim. That's not to say all the Muslims who converted to, or all the slaves who converted to Islam were suddenly free. That's not it. You just cannot actively enslave a current Muslim. That's all Muhammad
So
did.
once they're already enslaved, it doesn't matter.
If they're already enslaved, they can convert to Islam if they want, but they're not free.
And that also sort of gave incentive for the slave trade.
To spread.
So you can't enslave people within your area, so you have to go out. So they went into Africa, they went into...
It kept spreading because of it, because you would have people that convert to Islam and, I don't want to be enslaved. The way to do it and the way to get away with paying taxes and a variety of things is just to convert. But you still need your slaves, so you just have to expand the slave trade further and further.
So the Slavic countries, slaves were brought in from there, they were brought in from Italy, tens of millions were brought in from Africa. So it just increased the incentive of going out and getting them from different places, that's all.
Okay. So what would the original goal for your organization was just to try to find people in the United States or in North America and give them community over here, right? Do you also deal with any of these international people that I mentioned before that are going to say, hey, I'm stuck in this other country and I need help? Where do you refer to them?
The issue, it's a crushing issue. It's impossible for any organization, even a large one, not, say Amnesty was trying to tackle it, they can't do it. As I was saying, 5% of the population of Saudi Arabia, if you extrapolate that to the entire Muslim world, you have tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of people that are in that same situation. How do you solve that? The issue is we need legislative fix, we need pressure put on those countries, and we need our governments to actually designate atheist ex-Muslims as a persecuted class, which they are. And that this needs to happen across the West, and then we also need to put pressure to eliminate these laws and provide freedoms over there as well.
Well, there's another thing to look at too. When I was in Germany, I interviewed a couple of refugees, one from Saudi and one from Bangladesh, and the German government put them in these camps for refugees, and because you come from a Muslim country, you go to a Muslim camp. They're apostates. They shouldn't be in a Muslim camp. But the German government isn't going to experience the nuance of, hey, there's an exception here, and So there's not an appropriate approach to people that are trying to escape this. And this is another concern of mine. You say that you have liberal Muslims that maybe you could work with, but they're denying that there's even a problem. And then there's those that are exacerbating the problem. Do you have no allies within the Muslim world?
There are some, but they're very, very few.
And they don't want to be named, right? Is that...
Generally, yes.
Okay.
It's pretty rare. We have some allies we know of who are people who converted into Islam, so they come from a more tolerant background anyway. So that once they convert, they're willing to be more tolerant of people like us. But like Muhammad said, it's extremely rare. And even in liberal Muslim groups, we usually don't feel even comfortable to bring up the issue and talk about it because there's a lot of hostility. Because there's this idea that ex-Muslims, when we're talking about Islam and the problems within Islam and Muslim communities, we're just adding to prejudice against Muslims. And liberal Muslims, I call them, privileged Muslims in the sense that you're privileged enough to come from a liberal family who doesn't really harm you or force you into anything. So they don't see the negative aspects of Islam directly more often than not. So those are the people that are speaking on behalf of, those are the Raza Hassans of the world, right? Because he convert out into Christianity or something, and then now he's married to a Christian woman, but he's living a life that many Muslims cannot live. Many Muslims cannot change their religion and then convert back without facing any kind of consequences from their family, and marry out to a Christian woman without any kind of push to have her convert into Islam. So this is somebody who's living a very privileged lifestyle, a very rare lifestyle. And I think that can be expanded even to the hijab debate, because you have a lot of hijabis who are very fashionable, educated, and intelligent women who show up on TV in America and in the West, and they talk about oh, it was a choice for me. It was something that I chose, and that I'm not even denying that it might have been a choice for them. They could be coming from a liberal household the way I was, where I wasn't pressured to put on the hijab. But if I had put it on, it would have been a choice in many ways. But that's not the case for most Muslim women. And we have to be able to acknowledge that as well, that there are strong pressures for most Muslim women to be modest, to cover up, and the hijabis that go on TV and talk about how it was a choice for me need to be able to acknowledge that on a broader scale, it's not a choice. And in order for us to respect the hijab as a practice, we have to be able to actually make it a real choice and work to make it a real choice.
One of the things that I advocate is everybody should have the freedom to believe whatever makes sense to them, because you really can't control that. A lot of believers say that you believe what you choose to believe. I say that we don't choose to believe. I believe only what I can, only what I'm kind of conditioned to believe according to my understanding of the facts and so on. But one of the things that I advocate is that people should not get special privileges according to their belief. And one of the things that I cite for that is that this Sikh woman who got a job in a federal building, she knew that there were restrictions against bringing weapons in. But after she gets the job, and she's got a little bit of time in there, in a few weeks that she's had this job, now suddenly she makes us think that because she's Sikh, she should be able to carry her dagger. And special privilege for certain beliefs, I'm completely against that. So the idea that these flying spaghetti monster people with the colander on their head and the driver's license pictures, I would have said, no, you don't get a colander on your head, and this other person doesn't have a burqa either. If we're using this as identification, we see your face, and you don't get a religious exception for that. And this seems to be what religion seems to be all about to me, is special privilege, and claiming that you're better than everyone else because you belong to this belief set.
And then it's becoming a bigger issue. We're hearing more and more cases of Muslims in workplaces, and they want a time to pray. But if you are say you're working in a factory, I think this was a case, right, where there was this was an employer of a factory, an owner of a factory maybe. I'm not sure of the exact, but what it was is that he employed many Muslims. The majority of the workers in his factory were Muslims, and they wanted to take time off to pray, which meant that a ton of people at the same time
would have to shut down.
Right, and so this would cost him a lot of money if they all had to go around the same time, and it would have to essentially shut down business for certain hours. So I think there was a big case about this, but we're going to have more and more issues like this. And I agree with you that we shouldn't provide any accommodation for any religious group.
Just to add to that, they were allowed to go pray in the lunch break, which was okay. They wanted a separate prayer time.
And I would also want to bring up, if you're here in the United States, you try to look around which direction is east to point to Mecca, straight through the floor, guy. All right, so I don't know what else to say to add to that. I want to know what your goals are, what your expectations are, how people can support you, or what they can do to help the organization along. What do you say?
So the primary goal is to get ex-Muslims to speak out more, because that's very, very powerful. It's very hard to shut down somebody that's coming from the community and is pointing out the flaws within the community. So I would encourage ex-Muslims everywhere to speak out more. Be careful about your security, obviously, but otherwise speak out. One of the things we're doing is we've launched a project, Life Beyond Faith, where we're recording ex-Muslims and putting out their videos. And it's about their own experiences. So they run the gamut. There are people that have gone through horrible things, people that haven't gone through, and came out relatively unscathed. We want to point out that there are lots of people like us out there, and they're living normal lives, and they're happy. So it's possible to leave, it's possible to be free, it's possible to live however you like, and be a part of society, and be a productive member of society. And the more of us that are out there that are speaking out, the more it empowers the next generation. Within our own communities, we see that all the time. The people that join have been atheists for a decade, and after seeing other people, they start coming out to their family. This happened yesterday, I think. We had a guy that had left religion 8 years ago, and he joined, and he met other people, and he felt empowered enough that he told his family that he's an atheist. They didn't know. The secondary effect of that then is that in the family members, doubt starts. And we've seen that a lot, where one family member comes out, within a few years, the entire family is atheist. Because Islam is very fragile. It hasn't gone through the generations of apologetics that Christianity has. So it's much easier to knock the pins down underneath it.
Yeah. All right, we've got nothing else for people to support the organization or anything. Yeah, how do you?
We have our website, www.exmna.org. We have a YouTube channel where we share our videos of people that have left the faith. And we're planning on doing more outspoken work.
Great, I'll make sure to include links below.
And if anybody wants to donate, you can donate on our website as well.
Okay, you've got a link for.
We have a link on our website. It's a
www.exmna.org/donate.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Sarah, Mohammed, always good to see you. Thank you for doing this interview.
Thank you
with
very
us.
much.
Thank you.
Night.